Those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, will come again with joy, shouldering their sheaves. Beautiful agricultural metaphors, parables about seeds that speak to us of growth and the mystery of life, which is beyond our understanding or control. Something seemingly insignificant that expands enough to create a home for those far beyond it. Jesus's words today inspire and perhaps puzzle us. But Jesus wasn't the first one in the scriptural tradition to talk about seeds and to use them as a symbol, as a metaphor. The verse that I just quoted is from Psalm 126, and the psalmist is using the metaphor of seeds and harvest to talk about the exile in Babylon, the 40, 50 years that the people spent. They were carried away, their homeland, their city, Jerusalem, destroyed. And a generation, 2 generations passed before they were able to return and rebuild their city, just a remnant of them. And yet the psalmist is able to say, those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, came again with joy, shouldering their sheaves. It seems that the people of God, through this psalmist, affirm that this process, this time of tremendous suffering, has in some way borne fruit for them. So I was thinking about this last year. I was thinking we have scattered a lot of seeds this year, a lot of seeds. Maybe seeds of good intention at the beginning around, I don't know if you remember last March, thinking, I can do this, like we've got this, okay, and we all thought 2 weeks, a month max, we're gonna stay home, we're gonna, stock up on soup and toilet paper, whatever it was. And little did we know, we had no idea. We wore masks. Do you remember at the beginning, they said, don't wear masks because we want to save them for the healthcare workers. And then they said, well, wear masks, but actually you're wearing the mask to protect other people. It doesn't really protect you. And then they discovered it really does protect us. But we did it even to start with, right? To protect other people. And I remember our presiding bishop, Michael Curry, using that as a metaphor. I protect you, you protect me, and the whole world is safer. Perhaps you picked up a new hobby or gained a commitment to learning about people whose lives might be very different from yours. I know there's been a lot of new learning and new energy around different ways to connect, creating virtual church, right? Seeds. And I feel like there was an investment of energy that was required of all of us to stay in one place and to be present to ourselves, maybe in a new way, to God, to our immediate household and family, just to be within those walls and to be within the walls of our heart, maybe in a new way. There are those who have experienced the seeds of loss, right? Property, loved ones. And there's the knowledge for all of us, and knowledge at a new level of how very precarious our lives truly are. Those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, will come again with joy, shouldering their sheaves. So I want to ask you to reflect this morning and maybe throughout this week, to think about if you've seen the seeds of your pandemic and fire in this whole last year, if you've seen the seeds begin to germinate, begin to sprout and grow. I know that I have. I don't feel like it's quite harvest time yet, but I can see the new life. I can see the growth in myself, in our community, in our world that's coming about. And Jesus talks about this. He says it's a process. It's God's time, not our time. First the shoot, right? Then the stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. And maybe we're somewhere around the stalk right now, or the head starting to form, but it's not that mature grain to be harvested quite yet, at least not for me. But take a moment to appreciate that new life in whatever form, however nascent it may be, right? That tender green sprout in your life, maybe only in just one corner of your life, but you have survived this year. And maybe even in just one small part of your life, you've done more than survive. Maybe you've in some ways learned to thrive, despite insane circumstances that none of us would have believed. I wouldn't have believed if you told me. So take some time to notice and appreciate that, right? Be in awe of that. That is an awesome thing. Now, I have to tell you, I come from a family of farmers, and so I know that this farmer in the parable who scatters the seed on the ground is a lazy farmer. Scattering seed is the traditional but sort of lazy and less productive way to sow seeds, right? If you really want to get the most bang for your buck, you dig a nice little furrow. You gardeners know this, and you spread out your seeds throughout the furrow. So, each seed has the best chance that it can have of producing fruit. But this guy just throws the seed on top of the ground, and then what does he do? He goes to bed. He goes to sleep. And he wakes up and he goes to sleep and he wakes up and he goes about his business. He goes about his life. But the seed grows of itself, right? He knows not how, but he does know when the harvest has come. I think that Arnold Lobel, who is the author of the classic children's series, Frog and Toad. Raise your hands if you remember Frog and Toad. Some of us remember Frog and Toad. They're just a frog and a toad, and they're friends, and there's fun stories about them. I think he must have had this parable in mind when he wrote the story about Frog and Toad. So Frog has a wonderful garden, flower garden, and Toad comes by and says, "Frog, I love your garden. What a fabulous garden. I wish I had a garden like that." And Frog says to Toad, "You can have a garden. Here's some seeds. Now, gardening is hard work, but just take these seeds and plant them in the ground. And after a while, you'll have a lovely flower garden like me." So Toad takes his seeds home and he plants them in the ground, and he looks and he waits and he watches and he says, "They're not growing. How am I ever going to have a garden? These seeds are not growing." And so he begins to expend a tremendous amount of effort in the attempt to help his seeds grow. He thinks maybe they're afraid of the dark. When it gets dark at night, he lights candles and takes lanterns out and reads stories to his seeds and tucks them safely in. And then he spends days, reading poetry to his seeds and singing to them and playing the violin. And then finally, he's so exhausted that, like our farmer, he falls asleep. Just goes to sleep right there in the garden. And then Frog comes along a little while later, a couple hours later, and Frog says, "Toad, wake up. Your garden is sprouting." While he slept, his seeds actually sprouted and grew. And Toad says to Frog, "Frog, you were right. Gardening is a lot of work." You might have heard the expression attributed to St. Augustine: "Pray as if everything depended on God, and work as if everything depended on you." I think it's pretty easy, at least for me, to get caught up in this second part, right? And to work as though everything depended on me. This has been a lot of work these last couple of weeks with all our special celebrations and retooling and getting ready for, I'm headed off on the youth mission trip this week. So last night, after doing all the work to get ready and packing, I finally went to bed. It was kind of warm. I left the window open and I even pulled the curtain aside to let more air in. And as I turned off the light and went to lay down, I could see the stars. So I looked a little more closely out the window and I saw the Big Dipper just perfectly framed above the house next door between the tree line and just like framed in my window. And I said, "Thanks for the reminder. I actually don't cause the earth to turn. None of this actually depends on me. God, you hold the whole world in your hands. You hold all of us and all of this in your hands. Thank you for reminding me. I needed that today." I have found these last few months, this transition from pandemic back to something more like regular life, to be just an incredibly difficult time, actually, being honest. And I sort of anticipated that. I don't know if you remember at Easter, I preached about messy resurrection. You remember that? And then we talked about Bridges' transition model and that messy neutral zone between something dying and something new being born, and how that's a difficult phase that we all sort of have to go through. And it has been for me. I find myself with a shorter, smaller margin than I'm used to, and things that might normally I might just be able to let go kind of get to me. I think we have all done our darndest, for a long time to kind of buckle down and deal with this life. And it's wonderful to get back, and it's wonderful to see human beings in church, and it's wonderful to have all these incredible celebrations. And still we are all exhausted, and we are still carrying trauma, right? We're carrying that. And we don't know how to act in every situation. If you noticed all of this sort of awkwardness, and we have to sort of reassess every part of our lives and how and when and if, and we're going to re-engage with all of that. It's a lot. It's a lot. And add to that, like I said earlier, whatever sort of certainty we had about the future, or sort of assurance, about that is pretty well gone, right? Like pretty much nothing would surprise me now. We were joking with somebody yesterday about, that robots taking over the world. And I was like, that would about fit, for now. Like that wouldn't terribly surprise me given everything else that's happened. So this is a tender time, and it's a vulnerable time. And I think it's a time that we're particularly vulnerable to some of the lies that the enemy tells us, like you're alone, nobody else understands, right? Or fear, just giving into fear and anxiety and even panic and terror sometimes. Bitterness, doubts, these can all prey on us now. But I found myself wondering, in the presence of these incredible parables, if this time, this like pandemic transition time, just like the last year has been itself, might be a seed sowing time. What if we scattered on the ground, or offered up to God, or just in whatever way we could, relinquished the seeds of our fear, of our isolation, of our anxiety for the future, even of our hopes? We just scattered those, offered them up to God, to wait to see what new life will come. Those who go out weeping, carrying the seed, will come again with joy, shouldering their sheaves. The seeds of new life, of God's kingdom, of justice, peace, of love, of life, and life abundant for all, are among us and within us. Right? The seeds are here. What belongs to us is the sowing, the scattering, the relinquishing of the seed, letting it go, letting it all go into the soil, so that God can bring growth, so that God can bring new life, because that is what God does. I have an incredible example of this, and those of you who are here in person will see it as you leave if you look. Those of you who are online, I'll try to post a picture, or hopefully you can come by and check it out sometime, because hopefully it's not going anywhere. But we have this amazing oak tree in the courtyard of Grace Church. And those of you who've been around for a while know the new church building was literally built around that oak tree. Like the preservation of this 150-year-old oak tree was a huge, huge feat. And the oak tree has kind of taken on more meaning and symbolism for me as we've, as I've been here longer. It's almost 5 years now. I'm thinking about the history of that tree being here before this church was founded, and the 150-year anniversary that we're coming up on in a few years, and looking to the future. And you might have noticed in our stewardship efforts last year, the oak tree symbol came up, and it's kind of become an important symbol for us. And so I started to worry about the oak tree. I thought, well, we need to get some acorns, and we need to, germinate some oaks, and we need to, make sure we propagate enough that this oak tree will continue, into the future. And I spent quite a bit of time looking for acorns and asking people, it doesn't seem to be making acorns. Could it be too old to make acorns? Is it just a bad year? What's going on? And then a couple of months ago, I think it might have been during the Good Friday service when we were out in the patio, I noticed a little oak tree sapling that's planted right in the corner of the enclosure around the oak tree, far enough from the existing oak tree to grow up, side by side with its mother tree, right? And actually in a perfect place, a much more convenient place for the buildings than the current oak tree is. So sometimes God gives the growth and also does the planting. And all that we need to do is get out of the way. So my prayer for you, for all of us, for our church, beloved community, is to rest, right? That we can go to sleep like the farmer and like Toad, that we can rest secure in the knowledge of God's love for us, that God's got the whole world in his hands, all of this and all of us, and that God's will for us is life. God's grace for us, God's favor towards us, God's providence for us is unending love. Weeping may spend the night, but joy comes in the morning. And no one is outside of the reach of God's love. So let's scatter the seeds, let them go with abandon, reckless abandon, and look expectantly for the signs of new life as we wait and watch for the harvest to come. I have said these things to you in the name of our friend and Savior, Jesus the Christ. Amen.